Welcome to Friend or Foe, the series where we pick apart the characters in some of our favorite games to figure out who is a friend, someone that we don't need to worry will stab us in the back, and who is a foe, someone who would intentionally bring harm to the group if given the chance. I'm Josh, Bearheart Hawk, and today we're going off the rails with Trevor Phillips from Grand Theft Auto 5. As always, you can find a link in the description to a playlist for this series for those long nights where you just want to sit back, relax, and listen to a bunch of breakdowns all at once. Trevor Phillips is one of the three-player protagonists in Grand Theft Auto 5, and out of the three, he is likely the most controversial and debated. Throughout the course of the story, we see him commit all kinds of atrocious acts, but we also see him showing compassion and care to those that he is close to. He lives in a trailer in the town of Sandy Shores, just north of Los Santos in the state of San Andreas, and he even owns his own company, Trevor Phillips Industries, known for running drugs and guns among other illicit items in and out of San Andreas. He's often seen as having any number of mental illnesses, most of which stem from abusive parents and a lack of any stability in his life, and most people who meet him seldom look any deeper than the surface level before deciding that they don't want anything to do with him. But is he as bad as he seems at first glance? One thing I want to get out of the way before we get too far along is that I did talk a bit about Trevor in the Philosophy and Ethics in Games series when he first popped up in the story. In that video, I only lightly touched on some of his problems, and I laid out a case for him having something known as intermittent explosive disorder to explain some of his more violent outbursts. I would highly recommend checking out that video as well, as I'm going to be covering a few different angles in this breakdown, and the two should pair up rather nicely as a full look at his character and personality. For starters, I want to touch on something that I mentioned in the opening about how people are pretty quick to judge Trevor, and not many of them want to stick around once they get the first impression out of the way. One of his biggest issues stems from his childhood and the abuse that he suffered at the hands of his parents. Through various dialogue in the game, we can learn that Trevor never really had a stable home. He was in and out of foster care and eventually various correctional institutions before eventually joining the Canadian Air Force, only to have that fall through as well when a mental health evaluation grounded him just before he earned his wings. How much of his backstory is accurate or true is up for debate though, as most of it is relayed through various rantings as he tries to make points to people that he is angry with. Assuming the story about his time in foster care and the abuse at the hands of his parents is true though, I think it explains a lot about his personality. Children who wind up in the foster care system often wind up dealing with a multitude of mental health issues, both as adolescents and later in life. Most of these issues stem from being moved from home to home and never being able to establish any kind of stability in the form of a standard routine or social support structure. If Trevor really dealt with being trapped in the foster care system for years and suffered abuse at the hands of his biological and possibly even foster parents, there is a decent chance that he has abandonment issues to go along with any other mental health instabilities that he may have. Those abandonment issues, when carried into adulthood, could mean that he has built an emotional wall that very few people would have a chance to break through. To build on that, many of the outbursts and socially unacceptable actions that he takes could be a reflection of how thick that wall is, as he does things that he knows will push people away, reinforcing the idea that everyone is going to abandon him at some point. And those abandonment issues will also affect his self-worth, making him feel like he is worthless. His living conditions reflect that sentiment, with his home and business both looking run down. He assumes that people in his life abandon him because he isn't worth any more than a standard pile of trash. And if he is truly that low, then there is no reason to try and make the spaces that he lives and works in any nicer. Occasionally, though, he comes across people that aren't scared off by his way of living, because either they are in the same situation as him, or they are just the kind of good people that truly don't let much bother them. This would include people like Ron, Wade, Chef, Cletus, and others in the small community of Sandy Shores where Trevor has built himself a life in the years following the botched robbery of the cash depot in North Yankton. This group of individuals sees Trevor as one of them, despite his predilection for violence, and they readily accept him even when his treatment of some of them can be downright abusive. Trevor doesn't know how to reciprocate their acceptance of him, as it goes against the narrative he's built about being unlovable and a piece of garbage, but he does show appreciation in his own way from time to time. But the Sandy Shores community isn't the first group of people that made Trevor feel like he might actually belong. And to really get into his head, we'll have to look at his relationship with Michael Townley. Michael was the first person in Trevor's life to really stick around and make him feel like he might not be so broken. The pair joined up with Lester and Brad over time, and they would wind up becoming quite the formidable force in the late 90s and early aughts. Michael would even include Trevor in his personal life, as the older man got married and had children who saw Trevor as Uncle T. Trevor would become protective over the kids, especially when it came to little Tracy, as he didn't want anything like what happened to him as a kid to happen to them. Things in the long run might have actually been pretty good if not for the whole life of crime thing. Michael would wind up betraying Trevor, though it would be years before Trevor learned the truth. And that betrayal might have actually sparked some of the worst behavior we see in Trevor over the course of the game. See, prior to the first time we meet him in Sandy Shores, as he's having relations with Johnny's girlfriend and watching the news, life wasn't really too bad. He'd established himself as a businessman, albeit in an illicit way, and had built up quite the social circle. Things weren't perfect, but he had a home and hadn't gone too far over the top in the 9 years following North Yankton. It's likely he spent some time grieving Michael, as he mentions that a couple of times, but he managed to hang on to himself enough to stay alive and out of prison. That's kind of a small miracle, because even losing someone to something like death can be a lot for someone with abandonment issues to handle. Losing a loved one is tough at the best of circumstances, and the stages of grief usually include blaming the person for leaving you. And for someone like Trevor, it would be yet another example of being abandoned by someone that you thought you could trust. But this is where I actually think the FIB might have helped him out. At some point after North Yankton, probably within a couple of weeks, Dave Norton reached out to Trevor via email, pretending to be his buddy Brad. Brad had been killed by Norton at the same time that Michael was shot and supposedly killed, but Trevor didn't know that, as only Michael's name had been listed in the news as deceased. Norton would try to get Trevor to turn himself in, acting as if he was in prison, but the ruse wouldn't work. Trevor likely suspected deep down that there was something fishy going on, but the small chance that it was really Brad emailing him gave him enough hope to hang on to and not fully lose his mind. Those emails would carry him through and keep him going until he established his home in Sandy Shores, and probably would have sufficed for a while longer if not for Michael's catchphrase being uttered by a security guard on the news. The possibility that Michael was alive and had been, in his mind, hiding from Trevor for nearly a decade was enough to start him down a dark path mentally. Getting to Los Santos and discovering his old friend wasn't being eaten by worms ratcheted things up, and eventually finding out that Michael had planned for him to be killed all along pushed him over the edge. Despite that, he managed to hold on just long enough to make it through the events of the story. And while it may take some time to actually forgive Michael for his betrayal, Trevor shows a lot of growth personally by not being willing to just give up and kill the man he once called friend. With those points out of the way, it's time to decide if Trevor is a friend or a foe. On the one hand, there is a lot to be said about Trevor's anger issues and tendency to do things we might see as socially unacceptable, to say the least. He's accused of, and doesn't completely deny, eating people, and he has a tendency to kill people who might not fully deserve it when he flies off the handle. Case in point, Floyd and Deborah. The pair, specifically Deborah, may or may not deserve their eventual fate, but it isn't up to Trevor to carry out any kind of justice that may need to be served. I won't hold the more optional missions, like dropping hitchhikers off at the Ultra's compound, against him, since they are more on the player's whim to carry out. And while it could be argued that Trevor would totally be on board with sacrificing people for money, it isn't really a fair measure since those things aren't built on the main story. From the other side of the fence, we have to look carefully at how Trevor acts when he finds out the extent of Michael's betrayal. He could easily have shot Michael in the graveyard, and might have even been justified in doing so, but he didn't. As a side note, I know there's a group of people out there who think that he did try to pull the trigger and that his gun just jammed, but I looked pretty close while editing and went frame by frame, and while there is the sound of a gun misfiring, both Trevor and Michael are looking at the incoming Chinese triad members, and neither has their gun pointed directly at the other. I think the most likely explanation is that the sound was either mistakenly put in, or that Trevor accidentally pulled the trigger and surprised at the interruption. Getting back on track, Trevor has a second chance to take Mako out later on at the plaza when the FIB, IAA, and Merryweather are all fighting it out with Michael. But he instead chooses to help. He truly wanted to forgive Michael, even as he didn't know how to process the situation completely. And even though he has several outbursts and sarcastic responses in the final missions, he doesn't actually want to see any harm come to him. Trevor is also very loyal to those who stick with him and call him friend, and would never betray someone in the way that Michael did. Meaning that despite his shortcomings and antisocial behavior, Trevor comes out as a friend. It's important to remember in this series that being a friend or a foe isn't about being likable or even a morally upstanding citizen. It's about how someone would act towards the group, and whether they could be trusted to stand with the people who trust them. Trevor has a lot of faults, and he might not be someone that you personally would want to hang out with, but overall he is going to stick by those who want to be around him. He's abrasive and will work hard to push people away, but in reality that is more about his own trust and abandonment issues, and sometimes it's worth pushing past the rough or even razor-sharp edges to find the true person hiding within. But now it's your turn to pass judgment. Was I right for calling Trevor a friend, or is he really a foe? Leave your comments below, but always make sure to be respectful and try to justify your stance so we can have good discussions. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to Lost in Games on YouTube so you don't miss out on future Friend or Foe episodes, or any episodes of my other series, Philosophy and Ethics in Games, where we dissect the stories in games like GTA 5 and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. If you're looking for other ways to help me out while getting perks like having your name on the screen and early access to videos, I've got a Patreon, channel memberships here on YouTube, and a membership program over on my website. Dropping just a couple of bucks a month my way helps me keep making great videos like this one and helps me acquire new games to cover in the future. That's all I've got for this one. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.